Hello, welcome back as we continue our reading of the Bible that Jesus read by Philip Yancey. If you'd like your own copy of this, you can always check out the description of the video, and there's a link to it there. We're in chapter 6 now, and chapter 6 called The Prophets, God Talks Back. It starts with a quote from Abraham Herschel. It says, "The situation of a person immersed in the prophet's words is one of being exposed to a ceaseless shattering of indifference, and one needs a skull of stone to remain callous to such blows." So let's get started. If you examine the Bible, or even the most diligent students, you may find a telltale band of white on the paper edges just over halfway through. A mark of cleanliness indicating how seldom fingers touch the Old Testament prophets. Although those 17 books fill about a fifth of the Bible's talk, they tend to go unread. Why? I put that question to a Bible study class, and a graduate student bluntly summed up the class's sentiments. The prophets are weird and confusing, and they all sound alike. As I thought about the answer, I realized he had captured the very problem that kept me away from the prophets for so many years. Weird, yes. I gained my first impressions as a child at summer prophecy conferences. Large banners hung across the platform, white bed sheets stitched together and covered with crude drawings of science fiction like looking creatures. The drawings mostly depicted visions from Daniel and Revelation, and speakers wielding long pointers would expound on the meaning of the various toes and horns and eyes. They were a strange lot, the prophets. As Jack Miles observes, the three major prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, may be considered respectively the manic, the depressive, and the psychotic articulation of the prophetic message. As for calm, sane, moderate visions of prophecy and effect, there are none. Confusing, indeed. Each prophecy conference speaker had a private theory on how many months we Christians would have to suffer during the tribulation, and where on earth the Antichrist was growing up even as we met together. When the European common market began to form, excitement really heated up. The 10 toes of Daniel's beast, only to calm down a bit when the 11th and 12th members gained admittance. Later, as I read through church history, I learned that Christians had bet on the wrong horses in the 1940s with Hitler and Stalin and Mussolini, who seemed to vie for the roles of the Antichrist. And in the 1840s, when believers gathered on mountaintops to await Christ's return, and in the 1400s and 400s, and even in the first century AD. Such luminaries as Jonathan Edwards, Martin Luther, and Isaac Newton made solemn declarations about the fulfillment of prophecy that now appear foolish. I remember Salem Kirban identifying the invasion of African killer bees into the United States as a fulfillment of Revelation 9, presaging the sign of the fifth trumpet. I also remember in the 1980s hearing Hal Lindsey relate a spy scandal to biblical prophecy. Toshiba's leak of the milling system to the Leningrad shipyards he claimed had made Soviet subs undetectable by the U.S., thus moving the world much closer to the end times. I haven't heard from Lindsay recently. His book, The Late Great Planet Earth, was the best-selling book in the 1970s, bar none, except to note that much of his attention has turned from Russia to Iraq. A friend of mine cynically commented that the reason James Dobson grew so popular is that Hal Lindsey proved wrong about the end of the world. Christians suddenly realized they had enough time left to raise families. Recently, a passel of new books had come out pegging key events in the year 2000, which echoes the hysteria from the year 1000. Prophecy experts are now warning about red heifers being secretly bred in Israel, about computer systems in Belgium programmed to keep track of the mark of the beast, and about United Nations troops being smuggled into U.S. military bases. All the prognosticators in history have given impressive reasons why the coded prophecies in the Bible would find fulfillment in their own day. And so far, all have proved wrong. Should that surprise us? Jewish scribes had several centuries to pore over the prophecies of Jesus' birth and life, passages that seem crystal clear to believers today. and not one of them came up with the accurate predictions of the Messiah's first coming. Why should we expect to do any better with the second coming? Thinking such thoughts, I confess, used to make me skeptical of reading the prophets at all. If no one can agree on their meaning, why read them? And they all sound alike. The last complaint, I confess, posed the biggest obstacle to my reading the prophets. They seem boring. Through the forms of preaching, poetry, politics, and literature, all of them gave variations of the same two-liner message. It's going to get bad, real bad, and then it will get much better. In short, when I thought about the prophets at all, I had the image of a fusty old men wagging their fingers at the world, the same image that has inspired countless caricatures in magazine cartoons. The next section is called Thoroughly Modern Books. For this reason, my Bible, too, showed a broad band of white after the poetry books, signifying unread portions, until one day my work on the student Bible called for a close reading of them. My job now required me to study the prophets. A surprising thing happened over time. I experienced an abrupt turnabout, so abrupt that I may now claim the prophets as my favorite section of the entire Bible. Far from my prior stereotype of fusty finger waggers, I found the prophets to be the most modern writers imaginable. In chapter after chapter, they deal with the very same themes that hang like a cloud over our century: the silence of God, economic disparity, injustice, war, the seeming sovereignty of evil, the unrelieved suffering that afflicts our world. And these, the same themes that surface periodically in Job, Psalms, and Ecclesiastes, and even Deuteronomy, the prophets bring about sharp focus, as if examining them under a microscope. Uh, proto Prototypal books of Old Testament realism. The prophets eloquently express the doubts, pains, and complexities that we all feel, that I feel. I came to see them as acute witnesses to the dilemma of being human. Isaiah, normally a towering giant of faith, lamented at one point, "Truly you are a God who hides himself." Another time he cried out in near despair, "Oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down." Most of Habakkuk comprises a loud complaint to God, beginning with words that resound in modern skeptics. "How long, O Lord, must I call for help? But you do not listen." Oh, or cry out to you, "Violence!" But you do not save. Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong? Malachi and Jeremiah loudly protested the failure of success theology in their day. God's prophets were no longer like Elijah, blasting enemies with fire from the sky. They were moldering in dungeons and wells, if not being sawed in half. Jeremiah, who after all bequeathed us the English word Jeremiad, filled the longest book in the Bible with a message squeezed out between sobs. "Oh, that my head were springs of water and my eyes fountains of tears. My heart is broken within me. All my bones tremble. I am like a drunken man, like a man overcome by wine. Oh, my anguish, my anguish! I writhe in pain. Oh, the agony of my heart! My heart pounds within me. I cannot keep silent." What caused such existential torment? Beyond his own pain and that of his people, Jeremiah agonized over the apparent powerlessness of God. He challenged God directly. "Why are you like a man taken by surprise, like a warrior powerless to save?" The agnostic philosopher Voltaire could not have phrased it better. How can an all-powerful, all-loving God tolerate such a messed up world? And to the prophets, God seemed to be pulling further and further away from his creation. "Why do godless nations flourish?" they asked. "Why so many natural disasters? Why such poverty and depravity in our world, and so few miracles? Where are you, God? Why do you speak to us as you why don't you speak to us as you used to? Show yourself, break the silence. For God's sake, literally act. And that's where we're going to end today. Maybe in the comments below, you can post about how you felt about the prophets um, over your time as a follower of Christ. All right, and we'll catch you next week as we continue this chapter, The Prophets, God Talks Back.